My sister-in-law walked into the kitchen that Tuesday morning, poured herself a coffee from the pot I had just brewed, and said, without even looking at me, "We've made a decision about your role at the company. You should start preparing to transition out." She said it the way someone announces the weather. Casual, final, like I was a seasonal contractor whose contract had quietly expired. I set down my mug and stared at her profile, her sharp jaw, the expensive highlights in her hair that the company had indirectly paid for, and I thought, she has absolutely no idea. That thought was the only thing that kept me from laughing out loud. My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 37 years old, and for the past 9 years, I have been the silent financial backbone of a family business that would have collapsed twice over without me. My sister-in-law, Renata Kowalski-Hargrove, has been part of that business for 3 years. My husband, Derek Hargrove, brought her in because she had an MBA and a personality that filled rooms, and he believed, as he often did, that confidence was the same thing as competence. It is not. I learned that difference the hard way. And so, eventually, would she? Let me go back to the beginning, because this story only makes sense if you understand how quietly it all built up, the way a flood doesn't start with a wave but with years of rain that nobody bothers to measure. Derek and I met when we were both 26. He was working at his father's small HVAC distribution company just outside of Kitchener, Ontario, and I was finishing my CPA designation while doing contract bookkeeping for small businesses in the area. We met at a mutual friend's backyard birthday party, the kind where someone sets up string lights and calls it a summer evening. He was charming and funny, and he made me feel, in that early way that only the beginning of something can make you feel, like the room shifted slightly when he walked into it. We got married 3 years later. I was 29. The wedding was small, a venue outside of Waterloo, October leaves, the kind of day that looks like a postcard. His mother, Pauline Hargrove, wore a cream dress that was close enough to white to make a statement, and I told myself I was imagining it. I was not imagining it. Pauline had opinions about most things, and her opinions about me were delivered with the particular efficiency of someone who had decided her verdict early and saw no reason to revisit it. She thought I was too quiet, too focused on numbers. Not warm enough for Derek, who, in her telling, was a man who needed to be surrounded by warmth and energy, and someone who knew how to make a room feel alive. I cooked well, she admitted once, but without any real creativity. I kept the house very clean, she acknowledged another time, as though this were a mild eccentricity. Renata, Derek's younger sister by 4 years, had always been the favorite. She was loud and bright, and she had the kind of beauty that made people lean forward slightly when she spoke. She had moved to Vancouver after university, built a career in marketing, married a man named Todd who worked in tech, and generally lived a life that Pauline described to anyone who would listen as glamorous. When Renata and Todd's marriage ended quietly, without drama, just two people who had grown into strangers, Renata moved back to Ontario. That was 3 years ago. Derek had been struggling with the business for about 2 years by then. His father had retired and left him the company, Hargrove Climate Solutions, and Derek had grand ideas about expanding it, moving from distribution into full installation contracts, taking on commercial clients, scaling up. The ideas were not wrong. The execution was ambitious to the point of recklessness. By the time Renata came back, the company was carrying more debt than it should have been, and Derek had been leaning on me, quietly and without much acknowledgement, to keep the numbers from tipping over. By that point, I had left contract work and taken a position as a senior financial controller at a mid-sized manufacturing company in Cambridge. I made good money, significantly more than Derek, though this was never discussed openly at family dinners. Derek's salary from the company fluctuated depending on how the year went. Some years were fine. Some years he paid himself almost nothing, and I covered the mortgage, the groceries, the utilities, and a portion of the business shortfall from my own accounts. I want to be clear, I did not do this because I was a pushover. I did it because I loved my husband, because I believed the business could stabilize, and because I had grown up watching my own parents navigate tight years with grace, and I understood that marriages move through seasons. I kept the details from Pauline because Derek asked me to, and because, Honestly, I knew exactly what Pauline would say if she understood how much of her son's stability rested on the quiet, uncreative woman she had been politely dismissing for years. So I said nothing. I kept the books. I kept the marriage. I kept the whole structure standing by, pressing my shoulder against it, year after year, without making a sound about it. When Renata joined the company as Director of Business Development, Derek presented it to me over dinner one evening as a solution. She had the marketing background, he said. She had the energy. She could front the client relationships while he focused on operations. It would take pressure off both of us. I asked one question. Is she drawing a salary from the company? He said yes, a good one. She needed to be incentivized properly. I said, okay. Just make sure the cash flow can carry it. He assured me it could. It could not, quite. I adjusted my own contributions to cover the gap. I did not make a scene about this. I told myself it was temporary. That Renata would generate enough new business to justify her salary within a year. And that the investment would pay off. And to her credit, I want to be fair here, Renata was good at her job. She was excellent at pitching, at client dinners, at walking into a room and making people feel like Hargrove Climate Solutions was exactly the kind of company they wanted to work with. She landed 3 significant commercial contracts in her first 18 months. She brought energy to the brand in a way that I genuinely could not have. What she could not do was read a balance sheet. What she did not understand was that the operational costs of those 3 contracts nearly outpaced the revenue they generated, and that without careful financial management, the kind I was doing behind the scenes, the kind nobody called business development, the wins she was celebrating, would have quietly become losses. What she also could not do, it turned out, was separate her professional ambitions from her family loyalty. Because somewhere in that second year, Renata began to see the company not as a business we were all collectively trying to build, but as a Hargrove family asset, and I, despite 9 years of marriage and 9 years of financial contributions that exceeded anyone else's in this picture, was not a Hargrove in any way that counted. I noticed the shift in small ways first. She stopped including me in email threads about strategy. She began making suggestions to Derek about restructuring the company's ownership to simplify the family picture, which, when I pressed for details, turned out to mean removing my name from certain financial agreements I had personally guaranteed. She started having long lunches with Pauline that Derek was mentioned in, and I was not. I noticed all of it. I said nothing. I kept watching. Then, on a Tuesday in early March, a gray, wet morning that felt like every other gray, wet morning in that part of Ontario at that time of year, she walked into our kitchen, poured herself coffee from my pot, and told me I should start preparing to transition out. I asked her to explain what she meant. She sat down across from me, with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this and was pleased with how it was going. She said that she and Derek had been talking, and they felt the company had grown beyond the stage where it needed external financial oversight built into the family structure. They were planning to bring in a part-time CFO on contract. Someone objective. She said the word objective, the way people say it when they mean someone who agrees with them. She said my role had been invaluable, she used that word, invaluable, and somehow made it sound like a polite goodbye, but that they felt it was time to clarify the boundaries between the business and our personal finances. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "Does Derek know you're telling me this today?" She smiled and said they had discussed it together. I said, "All right. I'll need a little time to review what that transition looks like." She seemed relieved. She had expected more resistance, I think. She patted the table once, an odd, satisfied gesture, and said, "I knew you'd be reasonable about it. You've always been very practical." She meant it as a compliment. It landed the way a lot of her compliments landed, as a description of a quality she didn't particularly admire. After she left for the office, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, with my coffee going cold. Then I opened my laptop. Here is what Renata did not know, and what Derek had perhaps chosen not to think about too carefully. Over the course of 9 years, The financial relationship between myself and Hargrove Climate Solutions was not a simple matter of a supportive wife occasionally subsidizing her husband's business. It was documented. It was contractual in places. It was personal in others. 3 years prior, when the company had needed bridge financing to cover a gap between a large contract payment and its operational costs, Derek had come to me. The bank wasn't moving fast enough, he said. He needed $60,000 for 6 weeks, maybe 8. I had transferred the money from my personal savings account. We had signed a promissory note, his idea, actually, because Derek, whatever his flaws, understood that mixing personal and business money needed documentation. That note had never been repaid. It had been rolled, informally, into an ongoing arrangement where I was effectively an unsecured creditor of the company, in addition to being the person who handled all financial reporting, tax preparation, and cash flow management. My name was on the company's primary line of credit as a personal guarantor. This had been necessary to secure the credit limit they needed. It meant that if the company defaulted, the bank could come after my personal assets. I also had a small ownership stake, 8%, that had been formalized when Derek's father retired. It wasn't much, but it existed on paper, signed and witnessed. And then there were the clients. This is the part that Renata, in her enthusiasm for restructuring, had failed to account for. Because my professional network, my decade plus of relationships with accountants, controllers, and operations managers at companies across southwestern Ontario, these were not company assets. They were mine. Many of the commercial accounts Renata had landed had come through introductions I had quietly facilitated. A word to a CFO I knew from a professional association. A recommendation passed through my network. A referral that arrived looking like Renata's achievement because she had been the one in the room when it closed. I had never claimed credit for any of this. It had not occurred to me to keep score. It occurred to me now. I did not call Derek that morning. I went to work, sat in my office, closed the door, and spent 2 hours reviewing every document, every transfer record, every email thread, every contract where my name, my guarantee, or my relationships had been material to the company's position. Then I called my lawyer. Her name is Patricia Osei, and she has been my lawyer for 6 years, and she is the kind of person who listens without interrupting and asks exactly the right question at the end. I walked her through the situation. She asked me what outcome I was looking for. I told her I wasn't sure yet, but I wanted to understand what my legal position was before I had any further conversations with Derek or Renata. Patricia told me my position was, in her words, considerably stronger than they appear to realize. I thanked her and told her I would be in touch. Derek came home that evening and made pasta and poured wine and was warm in the way he was when he thought something had gone well. He asked how my day was. I told him it was fine. He did not bring up what Renata had said to me that morning, which told me either that he didn't know the exact conversation had happened, or that he did know and was hoping I had absorbed it smoothly and we could all move forward without a difficult discussion. I said, pleasantly, Renata mentioned you two had been talking about restructuring my involvement in the company. He set his fork down. He said he had been meaning to bring it up himself. He said it wasn't personal, he used that phrase. Not personal, which is a phrase people use when something is very personal, but they would prefer not to deal with that, and that it was really just about professionalizing the structure. Having clearer separation. I asked him if he had spoken to anyone about the promissory note. A pause. I asked him if he had thought about the personal guarantee on the line of credit. A longer pause. I asked him if Renata understood that 3 of their current commercial clients had come through my professional network. He said he didn't think that was quite accurate. I said, very quietly, that I had the email records that showed it was accurate, and that I wasn't raising these things to make threats, but that if we were professionalizing the structure, we should probably do that properly, with full accounting of what the structure actually was. He said he needed some time to think. I said I thought that was a good idea. We ate the rest of the pasta in a silence that was not angry, exactly, but very careful, like 2 people walking across ice, each testing the surface before they shifted their weight. That night I lay in the dark and thought about 9 years. I thought about Pauline in her almost white dress. I thought about subsidizing the mortgage and keeping the books and making introductions and signing my name to a guarantee that put my personal credit on the line for a company whose other stakeholders had just decided I was no longer necessary. I thought about Renata saying the word invaluable and managing to make it sound like dismissal. I did not cry. I had passed the stage of this that might produce tears. What I felt was something older and quieter than sadness. It was the feeling of a decision clarifying itself. Over the next 2 weeks, I was exceptionally professional. I met with Patricia twice more. I prepared a complete accounting of every financial contribution I had made to Hargrove Climate Solutions over the 9-year period: loans, guarantees, foregone repayments, market rate services rendered without compensation. The total was substantial enough that when Patricia saw it, she said, "Claire," in a tone that indicated she was both impressed and concerned on my behalf. I contacted each of the 3 clients who had come to the company through my network. Not to poison anything, I want to be clear about that. I contacted them as a professional courtesy, letting them know that my role with the company was changing and making sure they had my direct contact information if anything came up. All 3 responded warmly. 2 of them mentioned, without prompting, that they had valued my involvement specifically, and that they hoped we would stay in touch regardless of what happened with the company relationship. I quietly removed my name as an authorized signatory on the company's secondary operating account, a process that required only paperwork I was fully entitled to complete. I also began to update my resume. The conversation with Derek came on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after Renata's announcement in the kitchen. He had clearly been building up to it. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table and said that he had been thinking a lot, and that he didn't want to do this in an adversarial way, and that he hoped we could handle the business side of things in a way that was fair to both of us. I said I hoped the same thing. He asked what I was thinking, in terms of what was fair. I slid a document across the table. Patricia had helped me prepare it. It outlined the total amount owed to me under the promissory note plus interest at the standard rate. It outlined the value of services I had provided without compensation over 9 years, calculated conservatively at market rate for a financial controller in Ontario. It outlined a request to be released from the personal guarantee on the line of credit, which would require the company to either renegotiate the credit facility or find an alternative guarantor. And it outlined the purchase of my 8% ownership stake at fair market value, to be assessed by an independent third party. Derek read it slowly. The color in his face changed in a way that moved through several distinct phases. He said, "I didn't realize it had gotten to this point." I said, gently, "I think we both stopped paying close attention to some things for a while." He asked if this meant we were done. He meant the marriage, not the business. I said I didn't know yet. I said I needed some space to think, and I thought he probably did too, and that the business matter needed to be resolved regardless of what we decided about everything else. He nodded slowly. He looked, in that moment, genuinely tired, not angry, just tired, and I thought that somewhere underneath all of it he knew had always known how much had been resting on my quiet, uncelebrated shoulders. I moved into my own apartment in Guelph 2 weeks later. It was a good apartment, 3rd floor, east-facing, nice light in the mornings. I took what was mine and left what was his. I had learned something from the story I'd been told about taking clean exits. Renata called me once, shortly after I moved out. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was, I'll give her this, more vulnerable than I expected. She said she hadn't meant for things to go this far. She said she had just wanted what was best for the family. I did not call back, not because I was angry, exactly, but because I had nothing to add. She had wanted what was best for the family, as she defined the family, and I had turned out to be outside that definition, and now we were all living with the shape of that. The financial settlement took 4 months to negotiate. In the end, the company repaid 2/3 of what they owed me on the promissory note, a structured payment over 18 months, and a separate agreement was reached on the line of credit guarantee, which Derek refinanced at less favorable terms, without my name on it. The ownership stake was purchased at a number that was fair without being generous, Patricia told me I could have pushed harder. I told her I was more interested in clean than in maximum. Of the 3 clients from my network, 2 quietly shifted their primary relationship to me personally rather than to Hargrove Climate Solutions. This was not something I engineered, they reached out on their own. I had, by that point, started the early conversations about consulting on my own, and those 2 relationships became the foundation of something I hadn't known I was ready to build. Pauline called Derek, apparently, when she heard what had happened. I know this because Derek told me, during one of our late and increasingly honest phone conversations, that his mother had said something that surprised him. She had said, "You let that happen. That woman held everything together, and you let it happen." I don't know if that was guilt talking, or some late acknowledgement of what she had always, on some level, observed and chosen not to say. It doesn't matter very much now. What I know is this. I spent 9 years being quiet and steady and practical in a situation that rewarded loudness and energy and the appearance of momentum. I was told, in various ways, that these were lesser qualities, that I was less exciting, less warm, less central to the story. What nobody thought to mention was that quiet and steady is what keeps the lights on. It is what keeps the line of credit in good standing, and the tax filings accurate, and the cash flow from collapsing in a bad quarter. It is what signs the guarantee and absorbs the shortfall and shows up every morning without requiring acknowledgement. That kind of work doesn't make headlines. It doesn't fill rooms or win new clients at client dinners or get celebrated at family gatherings. It just keeps everything standing. And you don't notice it, generally, until it stops. They noticed it. I had a coffee this past October with a former colleague who asked me how I was doing, and I told her I was good, which was true, and she asked what the experience had taught me. I thought about it for a moment before answering. I said, I learned that your financial contributions to any shared endeavor need to be documented, not because you expect betrayal, but because clarity is a form of respect for yourself and for the people you're working with. I learned that absorbing costs silently, whether in a marriage or a business partnership, is not the same as generosity. It is an act that, without communication, becomes invisible, and invisible contributions have a way of being discounted. I learned that the people who describe you as practical and steady often mean it as a subtle diminishment, and the correct response is not to become less practical or less steady, but to make sure the value of those qualities is on record somewhere. I also learned that clean exits are available to anyone who has kept good documentation and paid attention, and that there is a particular kind of quiet dignity available in a situation where you have more leverage than the other party realizes, and choose to use it only to the extent necessary. I learned that you can love a person and love a project, and still recognize when the terms of the arrangement have been changed on you without your consent. And when that happens, you are more than allowed, to renegotiate. Renata runs Hargrove Climate Solutions now, largely, since Derek moved into a more operations-focused role. I hear the company is doing all right. I genuinely hope it continues to. Those were years of my life too, and I don't need them to fail. I am, as of this past spring, running my own financial consulting practice. It is small and it is mine, and the numbers balance because I make sure they balance, and nobody pours themselves coffee from my pot and tells me I'm transitioning out. The light comes in well in the mornings. It really does. If there is anything I would want someone reading this to take away, it is something straightforward. Know your worth precisely, not approximately. Document what you contribute, not to be suspicious, but to be honest. Do not let the quiet nature of your work convince you that it is small. And when someone tells you that you are no longer necessary, especially someone who could not have gotten where they are without the foundation you quietly built, remember that they are speaking from incomplete information. You are allowed to complete their education. Just make sure your paperwork is in order first.